Welcome to our Teachers Lounge today. We're so happy to have you join us. I'm Stevie and I'm part of the training team at TestOut. Joining me today, of course, is Alan, who's our other training specialist. I'm going to initially start by briefly introducing our guest instructors, and then Alan's going to provide some more detail about our topic. So joining us today, we have Bob Bunge from North Seattle College in Washington.
Hi there.
We also have Dorothy Lyon-Lee from Metro Technology Centers in Oklahoma. We have John Williams from Beaufort County, South Carolina.
Hello.
Next, we have Mary Worley from Whiteside Area Career Center in Illinois.
Hi.
Now we have Monika Masuda from Lex Luray Technical Center in Missouri.
Hello.
We have Scott Adams from Southeast Arkansas College, of course, in Arkansas.
Hello.
And finally, we have Tony Kindwall from Boonslick Technical Education Center in Missouri.
Happy to be here.
Thank you guys so much for joining us today. And Alan, we have a lot more instructors joining us. So let's have you talk about our topic and why we have a larger group with us.
Great, thank you, Stevie. And you are right, we are so excited to have all of these instructors join us today to talk about the TestOut Teaching Aids that are provided for every product in LabSim. And so before we get started with our roundtable discussion about these teaching aids, I'd like to first show everyone where we can find these teaching aids. And it's funny because jokingly, I like to call them TestOut's not so secret, best kept secret, but really it's not a big secret. Let me show you where to find those. So in order to get to the teaching aids, you have to first log into your LabSim account. Next, you'll come up here to the My Products tab, and this is where you'll be able to have access to the different products that you have. And just over to the left down here, we have a teaching aids button for every product in the course. So you notice that I have one for this product, another one for that one, and it goes down the list and I have those teaching aids for every product. Now, when we click on this button, it will take us out to the different teaching aids that we have available. And we'll be talking about each of these activities and how these instructors use these resources that we have provided. But just to name a few, we have some Instructor Powerpoints, course outlines, some lesson plans, and these are all really helpful as people are preparing students, preparing their classes for the semester, and for many other reasons. So we're going to go ahead and get started by talking to Monika, and she's going to talk to us about how she uses the TestOut Teaching Aids to help prepare for her classes. So let's go ahead and turn that time over to Monika now.
Thank you. I wanted to talk about how I use the pacing guide. It is, to me, the most wonderful teaching aid that TestOut has prepared for us. I used it for the first time last fall, and it was fantastic. So I would like to show you what I did. Okay, so the first thing, I was a little bit confused about what I was supposed to do with the weeks, because when I looked up here where it will allow me to select the different weeks, there was nothing there that would fit my program. I went back to a calendar and decided that there were 30 weeks in my program. And so I went over here to typical weeks, and I simply changed the 36 over here, and I changed that to 30. And went back over here to the weekly breakdown, and then I was able to select the 30 weeks. If you come down here, changed into 30. So I found that really neat. Then there are certain things that I wanted to omit from my pacing guide because I wasn't sure how the year was going to go. I was afraid we were going to be out of school in terms of maybe having to shut down, going virtual, and so on due to COVID. And so I actually used the objective mapping. I'm jumping around now, aren't I? I used the objective mapping to check and see what I needed essentially in order to get my students through and get them to the certification. I figured if I can get through all of those things, then I can come back and cover things that are omitted if time allows us to do that. And so basically, I just simply unchecked everything that is on here. It is so simple to use. You just simply can control click and check the different chapters, and then it automatically fills the pacing guide for you.
All right, have any of you had any other experiences using this course pacing guide? Anything else that you'd like to add about that?
On mine, I'm at the 2-year level. I don't actually do the Network Pro to the end. It's more review to make sure my students got everything out of the program. But I actually pull the pacing guide and the different pieces for the different classes. My students get it at the beginning of the program, of my whole program. And so they can go through and go, oh, in this class, I'm going to learn these pieces. In this class, I'm going to learn these pieces. And so by the time they get to the end where they're going to take the Network Pro, they've been able to see where all of this. So when they're reviewing, they know, oh, I got this information out of this class. I got this information out of that one. And so it helps my students over the entire 2 years know where they're at and what information, where this information is going to come from.
I use it similar to what Scott just said too. I'm the only instructor, but we do things in different orders, and kids come in and out at different times. So I use it to predict what we're going to do for the next 4 weeks, the next 6 weeks, or whatever. So it's very useful in that, and I appreciate it being there.
I've used it when I first came to Whiteside. My classes were set up to be year-long classes, so the course guide helped a lot with me switching over to semester-based. And since my courses are tied in for dual credit for the local college here, it makes it easier to get things covered in 16 weeks. But I agree, like with Monika also, when I know it was kind of crunch time because of COVID and things like that, I started, okay, we can come back to this. So it kind of served a dual-fold purpose with that, helping me make sure I'm on track with that 16-week schedule, but at the same time, hitting on the essentials first.
Something I found that was very workable, really liked the pacing guide as a kind of an overview. But then the other tool I liked was the lesson plans, where it had the actual minutes as a guideline, not a hard, fast rule, but it gave me a much better understanding so I could handle 2 sections at once given a time frame, or it allowed me to be flexible and expand maybe over 2 days a particular lesson section.
Yeah, one thing we do in my college district is when we adopt a new course, we have to go through a process and get a master course outline approved. And that includes things like catalog description, curriculum objectives, mappings to certificates and things like that. And so I borrow liberally from the TestOut instructional guides in order to create that language during the adoption process.
Yeah, those course objectives, those are amazing when you're having to create, because I'm like Tony is, I'm the only instructor for my program, and I've got to create 16 classes, and you've got to create all these objectives and all this stuff. And of course, nobody knows your program. They just know objectives are supposed to look a certain way. Those help tremendously with being able to say, okay, here's an objective my students need to know. Boom, boom, just pick it up and I'm done.
Instead of what they need to know, we're at that SWAT, students should be able to. perform a certain skill set. And that objective translates very readily into that skill set where we can demonstrate that. And I sat on the committee for South Carolina for several times to outline courses and set both what was required of the student, but required of the student in knowledge base and skill base. And so borrowing liberally from TestOut and the lesson plans as well as the pacing guide, that met all the criteria. It was chapter and verse. So it solved a lot of issues and answered a lot of concerns because just as Mr. Adams said, nobody knows what you're doing, but they know that you're supposed to meet a certain format. And by having that format in a one sentence or a few words, then you meet that criteria and move on, and it doesn't become objectionable.
I use the objectives as well. We have each week have to have weekly objectives up on the board. So when our administrators walk in and the objectives are not up, it's not good. So I use these objectives to put up on the board. I also use the focus questions an awful lot. Those are extraordinarily helpful when we start class. This is something that the students can do. I post them in Google Classroom, and this is something that students can answer when they first walk into the classroom, and that helps with bell-to-bell teaching that they're stressing in our school.
I concur, and also I've used Kahoot and Quizlet to take those same questions again, and it's not one and done. You have to hit that repeatedly, but it allows the student to have it in a format that's not a trite, oh, here it is again, here it is again. Now it's competitive. So they're looking to score more points than the other person in the Kahoot, or they're looking to get a better overall score in the Quizlet. I also use that in the PowerPoints with Pear Deck. That becomes interactive. So I'll go through a couple of slides and then I'll pose that question. And then they'll have to go back to the video, review it to make sure if they don't get the right answer, then they go and look it up and see it, and it's reinforced.
Another thing I use the objectives for, we have, Arkansas does this, I'm sure some of y'all do too, but we have our advisory committee, our outside entities, the businesses, the schools, people that would use my students as employees. And I have like 15 people on the advisory committee. And of course, their big interest is, I have a student that graduated from your program. What are the things they're supposed to know? One of the nice things about the objectives is I'm able to lay those out with the classes they're in and say, here's the things that they're going to learn in this class, and not just learn the book. They're going to physically be able to do these things. And my pack absolutely loves, that's one of their big questions is when we meet every semester is, okay, how is this class meeting objectives? What are you doing to satisfy those, and how are we working with? So those really help me to work with my advisory committee and show them how we're meeting their needs.
That's great. Thank you so much, everyone, for those great comments about how to prepare your classes using the course pacing guide, the lesson plans, the objective mappings, and other of those aids that you have mentioned. I want to move over into some of the class activities that you all have mentioned before. I know, Mary, you said that you use the Instructor Powerpoints to teach in your class, and I think you even mentioned using Pear Deck. I believe, John, you said that as well. Could you talk to us a little bit more about Pear Deck and how you use that with the PowerPoint presentations?
Sure. One of the things that I used to do prior to the PowerPoints is I'd go through the videos and download the transcript, and I'd find the notes for the videos and put them into the PowerPoints, and now the speaker notes are in there for most of them. So then I turned on to Pear Deck and decided to integrate that into the class so that it can become more interactive. So then I take and put those focus questions within the PowerPoint. What I do is have the Pear Deck in there, and the focus questions, just like everyone is mentioning, are inside of the PowerPoint at different points so that the students have to answer and I can see their answers. I love Pear Deck for doing that. So it's really great because you can just smush them all together. Okay, so I'll show you here. Some of the questions I use are from the focus questions, so I'll just kind of start one and just let you see it. So I kind of do the instructor paste. As you are familiar with Pear Deck, it goes into the join screen and all of that. So from here, the students join in from the URL that's on the screen with Pear Deck. So then as I'm going through, and let me get to one. So I just kind of review the terms, just like I'm sure a lot of the teachers do, but then I just weave the questions in dispersed throughout the presentation. When you purchase proprietary software after a few years, you end up owning it, true or false, and then they have the chance to answer. And of course, we can show the responses and things like that and talk about it. So I just kind of go through and do this, and I'm working through in all of the PowerPoints that I have, especially now that TestOut is giving us more of that, which I love. It's great. So I'm so glad to have that as a valuable resource.
Great, that's so cool. And I actually really love Pear Deck. I hadn't heard about that before, but just seeing that looks really cool and fun and interactive for the students. Anyone else have any other comments that they'd like to share about PowerPoints?
My class is basically, it's a certification class. And what I want the students to do is to earn their certifications. We start off with digital literacy, which is the office, and then roll from IT fundamentals, A+, Net+, Security+. I start off and I have, a CompTIA roadmap, and then I turn around and I tie it to, here's the objectives for this certification. Okay, well, these objectives will tie specifically to this chapter, chapter 1, chapter 3. Here is where you're going to find out about databases, about Python programming, or the infrastructure. That way I can tell them, if you go through the whole course, you will pass this test. There are those who say, oh, well, I'm just going to do the test, so I'll just do the practice question. Well, then they don't pass. And I say, well, what happened? I said, well, let's look at your scores. And being able to say, here's the objectives, these objectives tied specifically to these certifications, and this certification wants you to understand SQL and database and the cloud, and here's where you're going to find it. So I try to incorporate and have them use each other as accents. That's what I do with the objectives, because I want them to get their national certs. Now, I love the TestOut Pros, and that's the final. But if you get a certification, that is national, and that's resume work.
One thing I found in doing this for now 25 years, it's not what I can do, it's what my students can do. So after I begin and model some of the Pear Deck and the PowerPoints, I will create teams of students. So somewhere in the nature of kind of like a fire squad, 5 students, a team leader, assistant team leader, and 3 specialists. I'll take that same team and translate them into competitions such as Cyber Patriot, where they have to do those things. So they'll create the PowerPoint, and what was introduced to us recently with one of our educators that helped coach us in the use of alternate technology was Flipgrid. So I had a situation where students would start going to YouTube to see how the labs were done. Okay, you spend 90 seconds on a lab and you make 100. Okay, well, you may be that good, but how do I prove that? Well, I get you to do Flipgrid, which is a video of that, and I start them doing the PowerPoints, and so that I can input that same stuff into a Flipgrid. So they'll deliver to me on Google Classroom. I'll move it into Pear Deck and then have them hit a particular topic and train the other teams on those subject matters. And then likewise, the other group will then train the others. So one group will do one lab, another group will do another lab, and then they'll cross-train each other.
I like that. Somebody once told me that teaching is learning twice. And so that kind of makes sense to me, where you have each other kind of training each other and it just gets more ingrained into their brain. So that's great. You know, it's interesting about these PowerPoints when I tell instructors about them and that we've created a PowerPoint presentation for every section of the course, everyone gets really excited. And I always make sure to mention to them that you can make edits to these. And so I'm just kind of interested in knowing, what kind of changes do you make? How do you customize these presentations to your own needs?
Well, and I was going to bring up, if any of y'all have had some of the books, especially people who aren't necessarily technical people, they're more academic side people. Some of these PowerPoints that come with some of these books, no offense, but they're horrid. They're written from some doctoral, master's level. You're trying to teach entry-level people with a bunch of PowerPoints that somebody wrote, and they go, well, everybody knows this. And it's like, no, they don't. That's the point. And so I always had fits with, I was having to rewrite all their PowerPoints and remake them. And when y'all come out with PowerPoints, I'm able to take a lot of those and, again, just do a few tweaks, a few minor pieces to them, and then say, okay, now I've got a set of PowerPoints that actually, what I'm teaching in class and what they're dealing with on TestOut, it fits everything. And so that's what I'm able to do, is just with a little bit of editing, a little bit of tweaking, I have this set of PowerPoints that covers not only the material I'm teaching, but where it's coming from.
I found that that's a very, very true statement. I let my students tweak the PowerPoints into language that they can understand, and then I'll have them put their picture in it. So the following year, all of a sudden they'll present that, and the kids, oh yeah, that's so-and-so. Yeah, oh God, he looks better there than he does now. It brings a lot of socialization along with that, but it also gives them a real common ground. And if there's a couple of misspellings and a little bit of, shall we say, syntactical misalignment, I leave it in there because that's how it's understood.
John, that is so true. Students love to see the pictures of someone who has done what they're trying to do. And so I have a wall of fame. And as I get their PC Pro or their A+ certification, I take a picture of 5x7 with them holding their cert and put that on the wall. And that is how we start the next year. And so they say, well, I know this guy. Well, I went to school with it. Well, shoot, if he can do it, I can do it. And it helps them realize the possibilities. But I call it my wall of fame. And then once the second year is up, then I roll it into an 8x11-inch certificate that all of the names are on for that year. But they like to see themselves and people that they know. I like your idea of the PowerPoint. It's a good one.
Dorothy, I have the same name on my wall of fame. It's called the CT Wall of Fame. I don't have their pictures, but I have their certifications. I kind of retire them after 2 years. I go 2 years back so that the ones that are first year and second year can see the students from their school that came through. But it's funny, we have the same name for our wall of fame.
I have a wall of fame as well. And I keep all the students' certifications up on there, and they are so thrilled when they get their name up there. I had one student who had to take, because of COVID, had to take his certification later than the other students. And when he came back, he's like, Mrs. Masuda, have you printed out my certification yet? It's got to go up there. I don't see my name up there yet. So they get really excited about that.
And see, I've done that, except I let my students, when they pass the cert, I let them put their own. In other words, they come up and put it, and we have sections on our wall because we're only doing a certain number of certs. So everyone they pass, they put their own certs. So when they come back through, or if they're in an upper level class and they have lower level people, like we have second year people that are coming into the first year people that are going, you see that one, you see that one, you see that, those are mine. We have people that have graduated and come back by the school and go, is my cert still up? Still on the wall. And by the way, I know this is out of the teaching aid, but those posters y'all passed out, y'all send us every once in a while, those are amazingly inspirational, especially the young guy with the Audi car, because I know that story. I heard it at one of the get-togethers in Utah. My students love that story. I've had more than one go, I want that. I want one of those just like that. So.
That's awesome. I really do love that. And now that we're on the topic of certification, I do want to get a little bit more into the objective mapping aid. How do you all use the objective mappings to help students to prepare for certification? And actually, want to pass this over to Bob. I know Bob is one of our instructors from the higher education field. And so, Bob, how do you use this objective mapping?
I guess one thing that occurs to me is before we even have a class, we have to analyze industry trends and figure out which things to offer. So, I mean, right now we're at a sea change where Microsoft is shaking up their certification program. There's some new things on the horizon, Cloud Plus, CyberOps Plus, a few other things. And so, you know, we're faced with the decision of what are we even going to teach? And some of the criteria that would help us select a new area to target is, of course, is there industry demand? But also, can we align the curriculum with a certification exam that's realistic for students to pursue? And also, we are, by the way, on a 10-week quarter system in the state of Washington, which is a little unusual. So one thing I have to do with all of the curriculum objectives and curriculum mappings is a lot of carpentry to figure out what fits into 10 weeks, because not every product can be done every chapter in 10 weeks. So sometimes we need to be selective. And so you have to prioritize which objectives are going to be, you know, the strongest priority. How can we spread things over 2 different quarters and so forth? So anyway, long story short, when I'm trying to figure out how to parse the different content and how to adopt new courses to track changing industry trends, it's extremely helpful to have documentation in detail about what the week by week objectives are, you know, what the learning activities are, and what the certification mappings are. So without that documentation, if I just had to like go through the product and take my own notes, that would be incredibly time consuming, you know, stand in the way of advancing what we're trying to do.
I was going to add, I went from the 2-year level 2, and I actually have an internship with several organizations outside of our school. And that's one of the things we're able to do is when the internship kicks in and when students are eligible for the internship, they're supposed to have be at a certain class level. And one of the things they do is ours fits with the PC Pro. In other words, they have to have the PC Pro to be eligible for the internship. And the people that are using interns have that objective map. So they say, okay, when you start your intern, these are the things that you're supposed to know how to do. That objective map said, this is what you know how to do. And so the organizations using our interns they put them right to work, put them right in there and get them going, because they already know, hey, they know how to do this and this and this and this. They're not having to ask, hey, do you know how to make a cable? Hey, do you know how to add a piece of software to a computer? You know, they already know that.
When we were doing the state standards over the course of the past 18 years, the material that TestOut provided in terms of an objective map, basically that met the SANS criteria, that met the Cisco criteria, that met the Microsoft criteria, it met the CompTIA criteria. So with that relating to each one of those particular certifying bodies, and it allowed us to conclude objectives into the standards so that the objective and the standards were simultaneous. And we looked at TestOut, which really gave us a path in terms of terminology and objective standards that we could apply to all of them. Then we had one of the biggest employers in South Carolina is the military. They have been on our committee, and with all of the subcontractors, it then translates into something that can fit seamlessly into their organization and their employment pathways.
I like that very much. Let's briefly move on to our course outline. And I want to ask this question actually specifically to Tony. I know, Tony, you said that you use the course outline for instructional planning. How do you use the course outline to help your students prepare for certification as well?
I mainly use it to build a syllabus. It's laid out really well. And then it's also a guide to kind of tell you where, like what section had which item. And I like that a little better than the objective list, just because it's a little bit more concise, and a high school student likes the shorter words and the shorter sentences. So if you're looking up a certain thing, well, then I know, oh, okay, that's in this chapter, this subsection, that way. I don't modify it much, and I have it posted, but that's about all. It's mainly just for planning at the very beginning.
Great, thank you, Tony. Let's quickly actually go over to the accessibility document. So for those of you who don't know, we have some documents that are available for our students with accessibility needs. How do you all use those accessibility documents if you do use them?
Ours, we actually have a person on campus that when we have somebody with an accessibility issue, they go through and evaluate, and they send us documentation that says this person has this issue. Well, the problem is they don't tell us what to do to help with that issue. And so I'm able to take those down, print them out, and go to them with that student and say, okay, here are some things I can do to work with you in this environment, with this certification, with these pieces. And then we can get a plan down instead of just a document that says this person has a learning disability, whatever, and then go, okay, figure it out. Now we're able to build a plan that says, okay, here's how we're going to meet your needs in this situation, with that documentation to build that plan of how we're going to adapt this class.
I had a student who was very heavily autistic, who had trouble sitting and watching the videos. So I printed much of the documents out for him. It helped him to put it in a notebook and to read through the material rather than sitting and listening to the material.
One of the things that I have promoted to my students this year is the ability to take advantage of their bus time. You know, every one of them has one of these, but you can get TestOut on these, and they're plugged into their phone while they're on the bus, because like you say, Monica, they don't want to come to class and sit and listen to the videos on and on, but they have the ability to hear them anywhere with a smartphone. And that has worked really well with several of my attention deficit issues.
In our region, we refer to those as accommodations, and it's a capture all term. Being in Title I school, there are a number of those, as you mentioned. Translates very quickly into something that can be worded into an accommodation, basically word for word.
I just wanted to say that the main request for accommodation we get is more time on tests. And TestOut has an extremely convenient mechanism to go in and double or time and a half on the test. It's quite simple. And it applies globally to everything in the student's account. So if they come back and take a different course the next quarter, the accommodation is still there. So I found that extremely handy and convenient in responding to those accommodation levels.
I was just going to comment on the bus ride thing. I've mentioned that too. Seems like we have a lot of similar things, Dorothy. Most of our students come in, they have at least half hour to an hour commute in on the bus. So like you can't do the labs, but you can pull up those videos and listen for the ride home. So I thought that was pretty neat. We both do that.
Yes, and it works well for the students. And one of the other things I like is that I no longer am buying textbooks, because, you know, every 3 years you had to throw them out. And so now, instead of getting textbooks, which the young people didn't read, and I have juniors and seniors and adults, it's a mixed class, they will listen to the video. They will read the fact sheets because they're short. It's not this, 500-page book. I can come up with cost justifications to purchase TestOut because I don't have to buy the books. If a student wants the book, they can get it so much cheaper from someplace other than the bookstore anyway, if they'll get it online. That's one of the advantages of using TestOut. Accessible, current, the ability to change. I mean, you already are ready for the next security. That's the good part.
Going back to the accessibility documents, I know, John, you mentioned that you use these for reasons more than just helping students with accessibility needs. Do you want to talk about a little bit more about how you use these to create graphic organizers and anchor charts and other things of that sort?
When you're looking at labs and accessibility documents, you're giving yourself a path of what skill to do. So with what skill to do, you can create an anchor chart that says these are the procedures that you go through to accomplish that objective or that skill set. Now here's a visual graphic reminder of this screen to this screen to this screen to this screen instead of the words. Now that in their mind translates, oh, okay, well, I've seen that in the videos. I've seen that in how I do the labs. So now what we used to call muscle memory is now long-term metacognitive, because it's gone from short-term memory because we've pathed it multiple times into long-term memory. Now the visual with color comes out. Like when I do the custom exams, I always include the labs in it. And so they're like, okay, boom, and then stitch it all the way through. With graphical organizers, now we take words and we add them to pictures. So when we're talking about different socket sets, different media devices, I can see the actual cable. Now I know how to path it. I see what pins go to what. Well, this is transmit, this is receive. So I start off with pin number 1 to go to pin number 8 and creating a UTP cable. I know it's 586B because B stands for business as opposed to A, because most of our standards are going to be that. So we'll B to business, and then, okay, I know the color scheme. I know it's going to be stripes before solids, and then they'll pick it up.
All right, thank you, John. And so we just have one more teaching aid that we want to cover, and the teaching aids that are specific to our Office Pro course. And we have 2 instructors who are teaching that currently. We have Mary and Dorothy. Anything you'd like to talk to us about these teaching aids that we have for our Office Pro?
For me, what is most effective is that the students can learn Office 19 and not have to have it on their home system, because it's all in simulation. And that lets them have the hands-on experience without having the personal cost of buying it. Yeah, the Office has worked well, and I use that as a segue into the Certiport IC3 certification. So it works well for, obviously, key applications, but IC3 has living online as well as computer fundamentals. And you put those all 3 together, and your Office Pro works well on that. Sometimes I can't get people to pass these tests in an assessment center, but being able to do the Office Pro here in class or the PC Pro has worked really well.
Office Pro is one of the least traveled roads in my class. It's starting to pick up a little bit more, but it's a nice alternative for the students that come in that don't necessarily want to do networking or security, but they still want to be in the class. They kind of start off that way with, like, they have, generally people come in knowing Word and PowerPoint, but Excel is like the new one that they usually haven't used a lot. So I incorporate the capstone projects into my class as well. So we do those at the end of each section. So we do the the Word capstone project and we do Excel. And so they always seem to learn new things with it. That's what I like about it. Prior to Office Pro, I was using Desktop Pro Plus. And so when Office Pro came along, I was just like, oh boy, it's the updated version. And I would also echo what Dorothy said too, is that not having to have it on your machine is very good for us. We used to have the subscription. Our director was paying for the license, and then he decided, if we can all use it online and get this for free over here, then we don't need the license. So we kind of lost that. So the ability to have it in a controlled environment is really great.
So I have a question. I like posters in my classroom that show whether there's common hardware, common plugs, common operating system, just posters to decorate the room. And I'm new to TestOut. This is my first year, and I don't have any posters. And then I heard somebody say, hey, there's posters. So I might want some more information about that.
Definitely, we can get you posters. Why don't we finish off then, just as a quick little final thing, let's go ahead and go one by one and mention your favorite teaching aid, maybe in like a sentence or two, and why that is your favorite. So let's go ahead and start with Mary.
I was just kind of looking through and I'm like, favorite, it's hard to choose. I guess it's a toss up between the lesson plans and the course outline. I do like the PowerPoints also, so there's 1, 2, and 3. But I really do like the lesson plans because it helps with the scheduling of knowing where they should be. I a lot of times allow my students to work ahead of us a little bit so they can kind of see where they should be and teach them time management in the process.
Thank you. Monika?
I would have to say the lesson plans as well. It is very nice to look at them and be able to determine, okay, this much time for this and this much time for that, and having the focus questions in there. I really do like the focus questions a lot. Also, in the beginning of the year, I really do appreciate the pacing guide. I use it and I fill it out and then I transfer it over to my calendar. And then it pops up on my phone every day. Okay, this is what you're doing today. So this helps me an awful lot.
Thank you, Monika. Let's go to Scott now.
I'd have to say the PowerPoints are probably my favorite. I like how the PowerPoints are done, but then also the objectives. Again, it helps me communicate with everybody. Administration, my advisory group, all of those, without having to stop and go, okay, how do I explain to them what we're doing? So that really helps.
Great, thanks, Scott. Let's go to John next.
There's an old statement that I think that I've found that works hand in glove with the objectives. Put your cards on the table. And I found that having your cards and your certification as a teacher and putting them on the table to say, this is what I've done, I expect that of you, and these are objectives and the skill sets that I can demonstrate to you, and these are the things that you can represent with that certification, and that certification has value.
Thanks, John. Let's go to Bob next.
I'd have to say overall the course outline is the one that I go to the most. It's pretty critical for setting up a new quarter and setting up new courses and just analyzing the curriculum in general.
Great. Tony?
I like all of them, but I would say the PowerPoints are the ones I use every day. So those are my lifeline. So definitely the PowerPoints.
And Dorothy?
What I use the most of is the PowerPoints. And I like the fact that the images are not a copy of what they're going to see. But when it comes to planning, organizing the course outline, that's how I figure out the path for the year. And then the day-to-day is the PowerPoint.
Thank you guys so much. This has been such a productive session. I really appreciate all of the comments today. And Alan, thank you for moderating that. And as you can tell, we've had some great guests to give us some wonderful information that hopefully will be able to help you. We appreciate you being part of TestOut. Again, thanks everybody for participating. Bye-bye, everybody.